Ty, let's continue and wrap up the Buckeye 8 with Edison. What are the Wildcats looking like in 2021?
And it's under a new coach too, as Colopi is taking over the Edison program. But this is a program that has been really built well. And we talk about a team that was, you said, didn't win a game 2 years ago, to a team that was 4-6 last year, and a team that's looking to make that next step offensively. And it was an offense that's averaged just under 17 points per game, but it's an offense that really didn't lose a whole lot. As Vinny Marcino was really the only loss on offense, really the big loss on offense. But guys are returning. Gage Klein, their quarterback, coming back for his junior year, so had the sophomore year already under his belt. We talked about those guys starting those sophomore year quarterbacks. Edison was a year ahead of schedule, so they're bringing him back for his junior year. Jacob Kusick, senior wide receiver, which is going to be a huge weapon, I think, for Klein. Tyler Griffith, another tremendous athlete. They're probably going to utilize him in sort of running back, wide receiver, slot receiver roles. He's going to be utilized all over the offense, but expect him to have his touches. And then you have some good offensive linemen such as guys like Colton Hanlon. That's going to be huge on that O-line, as well as Ethan Wagner on the running back core, who's going to be huge in making those drives on offense, maybe driving better than Greenwood Chevrolet, the cars you get there at Greenwood Chevrolet, as well as Mason Montgomery, the sophomore kicker for them, I think is going to be huge. And we haven't actually highlighted a lot of kickers, Anthony, but I think Mason Montgomery is going to be one of those big kickers that we talk about. We talked about a little bit about how teams need to get in the red zone. He's one of those guys that can extend that red zone a little bit, 25, 27, 28-yard line. You don't need to get as far. He can make those kicks, and as a sophomore, has a cannon for a leg. I think he's going to be huge for the Wildcats on offense this year.
Look at you scouting kickers, just like Jeff Bezos in the Penn, Ohio game.
I mean, it's huge too. I mean, we haven't highlighted too many special teams, but when we talk about just improving offense in little bits at a time, getting those extra field goals or just getting in position for your kicker to make field goals is a step in the right direction for offense. And I think that's huge to have that kicker that's a sophomore that you know is going to be in your program for a while. Just have that special teams on lock. And we don't talk about it as a lot, and maybe it's not a big, huge emphasis for many coaches. You know, you want to look at offense and defense, but most coaches will tell you it's a big sigh of relief when they know that kicker position is A-okay. They don't have to worry about it.
I mean, you just have to ask Coach Guerrero last year how much of a blessing it was to have Clay Medvac and know that if he gets inside the 30-yard line, it's almost automatic. He doesn't even have to think about it. He can just throw Clay out there and kick the field goal. Doesn't have to push the envelope and go for it on a 4th and 4 inside the 30. Just a blessing, and Edison's going to have that blessing for 2 more years.
Yeah, and I mean, Edison, very young team overall with a lot of those positions. I mean, the kicker position, obviously, but I mean, quarterback position. They also have just really good athletes. I think Edison is really primed to make good and solid improvements year to year, and I'm expecting another improvement. I'm expecting them to honestly at least 5-5 to a winning record for the Wildcats this year. Honestly,
love the way they came out last year. You know, the year before 0-10, and they came out. I believe they won their first 3 games of the year last year, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, you'd like to finish better after starting that way, but you know, if they get some consistency, they get another year of experience, as you said, still a young team, but now a young team with a year under their belt. You got to think if they start like that again, then they're going to be a lot better than 4-6.
I would figure as well. And I mean, I think as far as the Wildcats are concerned, if they make those improvements on offense, I feel like they're going to be better on defense as well, because I think other than Vinny Marcino, who we highlighted a lot in offense, he's really the only other loss to, I would think, on defense. I can think of on defense. He was a linebacker for them last year, but they're returning a lot on defense just as they did on offense. And I mean, you look at it, it's a lot of those two-way players. Jacob Kusick plays defensive back. Tyler Griffith plays defensive back, and Ethan Wagner linebacker. But it's a lot of those two-way players, and having all that experience under their belt. A lot of these juniors are seniors and sophomores and juniors now. So the young team is getting a little bit older, and I think this program's ready to make that next step, both offensively and defensively. And I just expect Edison overall to be an improved team this year.
Ty is starting to get really good at these pro level segues. Let's talk about that defense that you brought up and what's going to make it so good in 2021. Obviously, it was a good unit in 2020.
Yeah, and like we said, I mean, you got 2 guys solid in the defensive backfield in Tyler Griffith and Jacob Kusick that's going to be in your secondary Kusick was one of those big tacklers, as well as Griffith out of the defensive backfield. Both of them ended up with a lot of tackles for a loss. I believe Griffith even ended up with a couple of sacks out of the defensive back position last year as well. So when you have two solid defensive backs that can tackle and be that second wave of defense that doesn't really allow guys, runners, especially either out of the wide receiver or running back position, or even the quarterbacks, fight for those extra yards and get that extra yard and break that secondary and get to the end zone. They really were good at stopping that. And I expect them to make even more solid improvements in that, and even come from that defensive backfield and get sacks too a lot and tackles for losses. Because I think these are two guys that are going to be really dynamic in that secondary.
And Edison does not give up a lot on defense. So we've talked about a lot of high-flying offenses so far today that need to get just a little bit better on defense. Flipping the script for Edison, their defense is almost locked down. Their offense just has to get a little bit better at giving them a little bit more cushion. And really, in my opinion, just capitalizing on some really good opportunities that their defense creates with turnovers and with stops deep in other teams' territories, 3 and outs. Offense has to be able to capitalize off of those opportunities.
Yeah, and you look at the scoring defense. I mean, Edison did allow over 30 points per last year, but it was really a sake because the offense really wasn't on the field a whole lot, and the other team's offense was. And sooner or later, your defense is going to get tired. I think the athletes too going to be a lot more well conditioned. Going into it, a lot of these sophomores now getting a full year of varsity experience under their belt, now going to have to go back at it. They're going to be more used to it. I think it's going to only help them last year. And I think you're going to see those improvements on defense too, making the extra stops when they do need to, and maybe not tiring out in that third and fourth quarter, late in the third and early in the fourth quarter. But it all starts with the offense too. Offense needs to sustain longer drives, and it needs to end with the Wildcats celebrating in the end zone a lot more.
So kind of surprised that they allowed 30 a game, because watching them, it didn't seem like their defense was doing that. But sometimes numbers can lie. Like you said, there are other things in context of how much points you give up per game that can really go into that. So I think their defense last year was better than that number kind of explains, especially like they said, the first 3 games that they really came out on strong. But, like a year more under their belt, hopefully that number goes down and they can stick the numbers to their film that kind of proves that they're a good defense, and they can see those results go up.
Yeah, I believe so as well. And I mean, looking at Edison's schedule, opening it up, home versus Southern. They go at Wellsville August 27th, September 4th at Steubenville Catholic Central, September 10th, home versus Matthews, 17th at Beaver Local, 24th, home versus Toronto, October 1st at East Liverpool, October 8th at Harrison Central, October 15th, home versus Buckeye Local, and 22nd, home versus Indian Creek for the Wildcats. And I mean, we talk about the East Liverpool and Beaver Local matchups. Both of those are away matchups, but they also go to play Wellsville this year too, which is another one of those schools that we've talked about too with Wellsville. And that's going to be an interesting matchup too, second week of the season.
I think once again, week 1 is full of good matchups. We're going to learn a lot about Edison week 1 when they go play Southern.
Yeah, that's also too. We talk about another YSN school. That's another one we're going to have to highlight as part of they're playing a lot of YSN schools too. I mean, inter YSN, but yeah, that 2 back-to-back games too, Southern and Wellsville for Edison. I think that's going to be a good test for the Wildcats to start the season.
Yeah, I think, like I said, week 1, we're gonna figure out a lot about what Wellsville is gonna put on tape. You hate to put too much stock in the week 1 game to base it on how good a team can be, but I think we're gonna figure out a lot about Edison and how their season is gonna go based on how they show up week 1 against Southern.
Yeah, and I mean, week 1's gonna be huge for Edison too. Just to see what they're like out of the gates, and then see how they respond and what they need improvements on from week 1, how they respond from that week 1, whether a win or a loss. There's going to be things that's going to need improvements on, because this is still inevitably a younger team really going into their second year before most of them are seniors. So this is really a team that still needs to make that next step and make those improvements. So I'm curious to see what they do in that week 1 game and how they make those improvements they need to make from it.
And the old adage goes, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. So I'm looking at Edison's last 4 games, seeing if they can finish the season a little bit better this year, a little bit more consistency when they get to the final half of their season.
Yeah, and I mean, you got at East Liverpool, at Harrison Central, and then home versus Buckeye Local and Indian Creek. We know Indian Creek and East Liverpool are both going to provide some competition. Buckeye Local and Harrison Central aren't going to be pushovers either, so it's going to be a tough end of the schedule for Edison. But I mean, hey, if they could finish strong, and you can even figure 2-2 out of those last 4 games, I mean, you figure six wins should put you in a solid position for playoffs if you're Edison. So, I mean, looking at the schedule, I think it is doable, though, for the Wildcats.
Yeah, that's not out of the realm of possibility to go up 2 more wins than you did last year. And I think Edison would be happy, especially, like I said, if they finish better than they did last year, then they're going to be really happy as a program going forward, because still very young, and they'll still return a lot of guys in 2022 that they are having this year. So if they can continue to make the improvements and really prove that they can be a consistent program and not just start good but finish the season strong, that'll do wonders for the program going forward for years to come.
Yep, and I mean that pretty much sums up what we have for the Buckeye 8 of those 3 schools of Edison, Beaver Local, and East Liverpool. Those are 3 teams too that were right around the same. Beaver Local 6-4, East Liverpool 5-5, Edison 4-6, right around the middle of the pack. I'm expecting at least one of those teams to make that jump into the next realm and make those improvements. But I wouldn't be surprised if all 3 of these teams we see solid and huge improvements from.